Greetings everyone. In today's session, we will discuss about a fine topic which is coming under physics, that is Newton's first law of motion. I'm not the one to beat around the bush, so I will just directly go into some of the real life examples. Okay, we will start by considering a very simple example which is very familiar to you. Consider a bus which was initially at the state of the rest. Now, when someone is starting this bus and when this bus begins to move forward, you can see that these passengers who are there on the bus, they may tend to fall backward. Okay, so you must have observed this. We will consider another example which is coming from the same scenario. Now, this time you have to consider a bus which is actually in the state of the motion. Say a bus is moving with a particular velocity. Now, when the driver applies the brakes suddenly, you can see that these passengers, they may tend to fall forward. Okay, so we have just discussed two different cases. The first case where the passengers were falling backward, and the second case where the passengers were falling forward. So those two cases were the different cases. Now we will consider one more example. All of you must have seen the fan, right? We know that when we switch on the power, the leaves of the fan, they would just rotate. Okay, just imagine someone is switching off the power. Even if the power is not there, you can see that the leaves of the fan, they would continue to rotate for some more time. As the time passes, gradually you can see the velocity of the rotation that would decrease, and finally the leaves of the fan, they would just reach the state of the rest. So here the point is, even though power is not there, these leaves of the fan, they are not going to the state of the rest immediately at that point. They still continues to be in the motion for some more time. So we have seen three different cases. Can you explain the reason behind all these three different phenomena? Well, the answer lies on this Newton's first law of motion. Okay, if you're able to understand Newton's first law of motion, then very clearly you can explain the reason behind all these three cases. Okay, so let's see what is this Newton's first law of motion. Before that, we need to talk about Newton. As you know, Newton was a great scientist. All of us knows that he's he's a genius. We know that. Now, talking about this Newton's first law of motion, Newton simply changed the way by which we understand our universe by enumerating his three laws of motion. And out of his three laws, we are going to learn the first law of motion. Okay. And in his first law, he is actually trying to describe what is the effect of the force on a body which is either on the state of the rest or on the state of the motion. That means Newton is explaining what will happen to a body if you apply some force to that body which is either in the state of the rest or on the state of the motion. Now, if you concentrate on this Newton's first law of motion, actually we need to memorize or we need to remember another great scientist. He was an Italian scientist and his name was Galileo Galilei. He was the one who came up with this observation regarding this Newton's first law of motion at the beginning. Later on, Newton just came up with some of his own observation, and he just mixed those observations with Newton's observation, and he formulated all these observations in the form of Newton's first law of motion. So when we talk about the Newton's first law of motion, actually this Newton and the Galileo, both the persons have got some role of it. Okay, so that's why Newton's first law of motion is also known as Galileo's law of inertia. Because Galileo is also there, he has also done some contribution on this first law of motion. So once again, Newton's first law of motion, it's all about the effect of force on a body which is on the state of the rest or on the state of uniform motion. So let's see what exactly is this Newton's first law of motion. We'll start by stating its statement. Okay. Now Newton's first law of motion states that a body continues to be in its state of rest or of uniform motion along a straight line unless it is acted upon by an unbalanced external force. We would first write the statement. So Newton's first law of motion states that a body continues to be in its state of rest, or of uniform motion along a straight line. unless acted upon by an unbalanced external force. Unbalanced external force. Now this is a statement for the Newton's first law of motion. Please go through that. I will explain what is the meaning of that. So Newton simply says this point, that means just imagine an object which is either on the state of the rest or on the state of uniform motion. Then Newton said that that body would continue to be on its original state unless that body is acted by an external force. Say for example, consider a stone which is lying on the ground. Okay, so this is the ground, and you can consider this is a stone which is actually lying on this ground. Alright. Now as you can see that this stone is not changing its position with respect to its immediate surrounding or with respect to the time. So therefore the stone is at the state of the rest. Now according to the Newton's first law of motion, this stone would continue to be on the state of the rest unless some external force acts on that. That means the stone will not move unless some external force acts on the stone, which is true. All of us knows that. Okay, so here this body continues to be in its state of rest unless an unbalanced external force acts on the stone. So that was the first part. Okay, so any body which is there on the state of the rest, it will continue to be on the state of the rest, and it will change to the state of motion only if some external force acts on that body. Now the same logic we can apply for the second part also. This case we have to consider a body which is moving with a uniform motion, or which is moving with a uniform speed along a particular direction. Simply you have to consider a body which is moving with a uniform velocity. Okay, so just imagine you are considering the case of a football. Let's say this is a football. Okay, and someone has kicked this football, and this football is, say, it is moving with a velocity of 30 meters per second. Alright, so now this football is moving with a velocity of 30 meters per second. Now listen carefully. Now this case you can see that this football is actually at the state of the motion because it is moving with a speed of 30 meters per second along a particular direction. Now according to this Newton's first law of motion, this football would continue to move with the same speed along the same direction over infinite time period. That means this football would never reach the state of the rest. So whatever was its initial velocity, the football would continue to move the same velocity over infinite time period. So basically what Newton was saying that this football is not going to reach the state of the rest unless this football is acted by some external unbalanced force. Alright, so here the second part is kind of tricky, you need to understand that, because the second part is kind of different from what you may think which is right. Okay, so whenever a body is in the state of the uniform motion, that means whenever a body is moving with a uniform speed along a specified direction, that body would continue to do so until an external force acts on that body. So here in this case, this football would continue to move with the same velocity 30 meters per second over a long time period, over I can say an infinite time period. Alright, now this is the ideal case. But in reality this won't happen. Why? Because in reality what will happen is, when this football is initially moving with a velocity of 30 meters per second, some external forces would act on that. Like this ground can offer some frictional force. Okay, so this ground could offer some frictional force on the football, and there will be some air resistance. So all these external forces would come into effect, and what happens, these forces would just oppose the motion of the football. So as the time passes, you can see that gradually the velocity of the football would decrease, and finally it would reach the state of the rest. So that is a real case, but just imagine an ideal case where there is no other external forces coming into effect. That means the football is moving with a velocity of 30 meters per second and no other external forces are coming. In that case, we can definitely say this football would continue to move with the same velocity over infinite time period without any interruption. That means the football is still going to continue it in its state of motion only. I hope you understood this Newton's first law of motion, which says that a body continues to be in its state, whether it is a state of rest or state of uniform motion, unless it is acted upon by an external unbalanced force. Now, another thing which you need to take care is here we have used the word unbalance. Alright. Now, what do you mean by unbalance? See, just imagine we are exerting some balance force on an object. What would happen? See, balance force are those forces which are equal in magnitude and opposite in direction. So, whenever balance forces are acted on a body, the net effect would be zero. So, there won't be any change in the state. So, that's why here clearly we are mentioning that what? Unbalanced force. Alright. So, in case a balance force is acting on the stone which is at the state of the rest, it would continue to be on the state of the rest only. There won't be any change. Okay. So the Newton's first law of motion says that this body is trying to be on its original state only. That means a body continues to be in its state of rest or of uniform motion along a straight line unless an external unbalanced force acts on that. Okay. See, actually, in order to understand this Newton's first law of motion, we need to learn or we need to understand what you mean by inertia. So let's try to know what is inertia. So the next term is inertia. Actually, without explaining the concept of inertia, this Newton's first law of motion is incomplete. So let's see what is inertia. See, inertia means it is a natural tendency of all the objects by virtue. And due to this tendency, these objects would try to resist any change in their state of rest or state of uniform motion. Basically, objects just want to continue with their original state itself. Okay, so first you just write the definition. After that, we will discuss more about this one. So, inertia by definition is a natural tendency. Of objects to resist change in their state of rest or of uniform motion Okay, so basically this inertia is a phenomena, and due to this phenomena what happens is objects will always try to remain on their original state. Say you consider an object which was initially at the state of the rest. Now due to the effect of inertia, this object would try to be on the state of the rest itself. That means if there is some changes happening, this object would try to resist that change. Similarly, if an object was initially at the state of the motion, now this object wants to continue on the state of motion itself. So it will try to resist a change which can lead to the state of rest. Okay, so that was the concept of inertia. Now if we properly understood this one, inertia, we could actually explain a lot of natural phenomena which is happening all around us. Okay, so once again, inertia means it is a natural tendency, and due to this tendencies, what objects will do? Objects will try to change or try to resist. That means objects will try to oppose any change in their state. So whatever was their initial state, these objects would try to be on their initial state itself. Say if a body is initially at the state of the rest, objects just want to be on the state of the rest itself. So they will try to oppose their change to the state of the motion. Similarly, if an object is initially at the state of the motion, the object just want to be on the state of the motion itself. So the object would resist any change to the state of the rest. So that was the concept of inertia. As I have told you before, if you understood this inertia properly, a lot of natural phenomena could be explained. Okay, so this is a really important concept. Now, talking about inertia, inertia is a one quantity which actually depends upon the physical quantity mass. So whenever you hear the word inertia, along with the inertia, who comes? Mass will come. So I can just write mass here. Okay, so you can say that inertia, or you can say that mass is actually some kind of a measure of inertia. For example, consider a body which has got a huge mass. Then the inertia offered by that object would be that much higher. Greater the mass is, greater the inertia. Okay, so this inertia and mass, they have a relation. Say for example, You consider two objects. The first object is there. Say the mass of that object is 10 kg. Okay. Now we have to consider another object, and the second object is having a mass of 100 kg. The first object I am naming as object A, and the second one is named as object B. Now when we consider these two objects, you can see that clearly the object B has higher mass than that of the object A. So the inertia offered by the object B would be definitely higher than the inertia offered by the object A. So the greater the mass, greater the inertia offered. Okay, so that is another point which is coming regarding the inertia. So inertia always depends upon the mass of a body. Alright. Now we will see what are the different kinds of inertia. Mainly we can see that we have two kinds of inertia. The first one is inertia of rest, followed by the second one, that is inertia of motion. Actually, we have already explained these 2 points. I will just take it one more time. Now, inertia of rest means, as we know, a body would continue to be on its state of rest. That means you would try to resist any change to the state of the motion. So that is known as inertia of rest. Whereas inertia of motion means the body would try to resist any change to the state of the rest. Initially it is on the state of the motion, so it would try to resist a change to the state of the rest. So those were the inertia of rest and inertia of the motion. Now we would get back to the examples which we have discussed on the beginning of this session. Okay, so we have started with the case where this bus was initially at the state of the rest, and we know that when this bus was started immediately, and when it begins to move forward, these passengers who are there on that bus, they may tend to fall backward. Well, that is coming as an application of this inertia of rest only. I will explain how that is coming. Listen. Consider this is your bus. Okay. Now this is a front part and this is a back part of the bus. And this is your passenger. Okay. So this is a passenger and this is a bus, and this is a front part and this is a back part of the bus. Now this bus was initially at the state of the rest. We are discussing about that case only. So when this bus was initially at the state of the rest, we can see that this passenger would be also at the state of the rest, because he is also not moving. Alright. So initially this passenger is at the state of the rest. Now we can see that after some time this bus began to move forward. So when the bus began to move forward, we can see that now the bus is actually at the state of the motion. And you can see that this is the lower portion of the person, and this is the upper portion of the person. Now when the bus is on the state of the motion, as you can see that this lower portion of the passenger is in direct contact with the bus. So when the bus is in the state of the motion, the lower portion that would be also in the state of the motion. So therefore we can write that this lower portion of the bus would be on the state of the motion. What is the reason? Because right now the bus begins to move forward. So therefore the bus is on the state of the motion. So the lower portion of the person which is in connection with the bus, that would also be on the state of the motion. Whereas if you consider the upper portion, see this upper portion was initially at the state of the rest. Now due to the effect of the inertia of the rest, this upper part, it would continue to be on the state of the rest. Alright. So initially the upper part also was there on the state of the rest. Still it is on the state of the rest only. So you can see that this upper part, that is actually on the state of the rest. Now listen carefully. You can see that this lower portion of the body is on the state of the motion, and the upper portion of the body is on the state of the rest. So what would happen? See, just imagine this is a passenger. Now the lower portion tends to move forward. So the upper portion, what would happen? The passenger may tend to fall backward. You understood? So it is very simple, because you can see that due to the effect of inertia of the rest, the upper portion of the passenger still continues to be on the state of the rest, whereas the lower portion changes to the state of motion. So due to this difference, this passenger may tend to fall backward. So that was your first example, which would explain the concept of inertia of rest. Now we'll see another example which will tell you the inertia of motion. So we'll talk about that example. We have the same scenario, but there were small differences. The difference was like, in this case, the bus was already at the state of the motion. That means the bus was moving with a particular velocity, and then the brakes were applied suddenly. Okay, let's see what is happening. So now the bus is actually at the state of the motion. So since the bus is at the state of the motion, you can see that this passenger is also at the state of the motion. Alright. Now when the brakes were applied suddenly, you can see that this bus would reach the state of the rest. When the bus reaches the state of the rest, the lower portion of the passenger which is in contact with the bus would also reach the state of the rest. So you can see this is the lower portion. So lower portion would reach the state of the rest. Whereas upper portion continues to be on the state of the motion due to the effect of inertia of motion. Okay, because we have discussed the case of inertia of motion. Initially this upper portion that was on the state of the motion only. Now due to the effect of inertia of motion, it still continues to be on the inertia of motion or on the state of the motion. So the upper portion, I can say that this is actually on the state of the motion. Actually this is just the opposite of the thing which we discussed before this one. Okay. So here the upper portion, it is actually on the state of the motion, and the lower portion that is on the state of the rest. So this passenger may tends to fall forward. Okay. So these two different examples will explain the concept of inertia of rest and inertia of motion. And we have seen one more example. We know that even if the powers were switched off, these leaves of the fan, they are not brought to the state of the rest immediately, but instead they would just continue to rotate for some more time. See, there also the example, or that was also happening due to the effect of what? Inertia of motion. See, we know that when the power was there, this fan, the leaves of the fan, it was there on the state of the motion. So when the power is off, still due to the effect of inertia of motion, these leaves would continue to rotate. As you know, as the time passes, this frictional force and some other air resistance, all those forces would come into effect, and naturally this it will slow down and it will reach the state of the rest. So that is also coming as an application of what? Inertia of motion. So we have just discussed Newton's first law of motion. So Newton's first law of motion explains or describes the effect of force on a body which is either on the state of the rest or on the state of uniform motion. And we know that this body always continues to be in its state of rest or of uniform motion unless some external unbalanced force is acting on that body. We have also seen the concept of inertia. Inertia means it is a natural tendency of any object, and due to this tendency, these objects would try to resist any change in their state. Basically, objects just want to continue with their original state. And inertia would depend upon mass. When an object is having higher mass, it would offer more inertia. And we have seen two kinds of inertia. The first one is inertia of rest and inertia of motion. I hope you have understood this topic. This is a really important concept and really important topic, because in higher classes you have to learn a lot about this Newton's first law of motion. Okay, so please go through this lecture one more time. We'll meet on the next lecture. Thank you for listening.